Crafting paragraphs ain't what it used to be, but there are some things that stayed the same. I remember being in the sixth grade in Mrs. Lindley's class, one of the few teachers that I ever had that understood me well enough to like me. And she taught us about it was a reading class, and she taught us about the essay. It was we would have an introductory paragraph, three body paragraphs, and a closing paragraph. Something that only ChatGPT is really good at today. But so we learned to write that way. And I remember the first time I pulled one off, and I remember how excited that she got because a light had come on in my mind, and I understood this is a very simple construct for the paragraph. You have a sentence that is the main idea. Then you have three supporting sentences. Then you have a wrap-up sentence that takes you into the next paragraph. And that was pretty much all it is. So I want to talk about that good old-fashioned paragraph and also to say that anything really goes these days as long as you're communicating. And especially in short form writing, we tend to write extremely short paragraphs, sometimes one sentence paragraphs, and we're writing a lot more in rhythm with the reader's thought and speech patterns. And it's my opinion that when you're writing short form, at least like on Substack or some kind of blog post, then it helps to rev up before you give a longer paragraph. You give some catching sentences to get the reader engaged. So yeah, we won't write in emojis and we won't go that far. So let's talk about paragraphs. So a strong paragraph is one clear movement of thought with one main idea that develops the idea with specific language and examples, and it flows. And it flows in an order that makes sense to the mind. And if it doesn't make sense to the mind, the reader will get hung up. And there are three basic qualities that I wouldn't have known how to mention until this morning when I was thinking about how to talk about this. But it's basically unity, development, and coherence. Your paragraph has to have unity, it has to have development, and it has to have coherence. So let's talk about unity. The paragraph has to all be about one thing. It should answer one question, not a bunch of questions, one question. And any sentence that finds its way into your paragraph that answers another question belongs in another paragraph. Let me see, I wrote down some examples and I'm going to share my screen. All right. I loved my job at the clinic, but my supervisor was difficult to work with. I also started running again, which helped my stress. The building was old and smelled like bleach. My sister was getting married that month, so my schedule was packed. Is that a good paragraph or not so good of a paragraph? It's a not so good paragraph because it doesn't really answer just one question. It's four paragraphs shoved into one. Why was the season so stressful? Is the question that needs to be answered. So here's an example of what could work. That season felt overwhelming because my supervisor pushed us harder than we could sustain. If you can say, for instance, then that you know the next sentence is going to work. Every morning I walked into the clinic bracing myself for her clipped tone and the way she hovered behind each of us as if waiting for a mistake. Even on the drive home, my shoulders stayed tight because I kept replaying our conversations. The stress was not just at work, it traveled with me. So this was a ChatGPT example of a unified paragraph, and I think it works pretty good because all the sentences serve the same idea. You see that? So that's unity. Then the next thing we need to have is development. This sentence works. I was anxious about the presentation and I could not stop thinking about it. That tells me what I need to know. It's just not that interesting. I could say, by noon, my hands were shaking so badly, I had to steady my coffee cup with both palms. I rehearsed the opening line again and again while I walked down the hallway because I could not remember what came after it. Even when I sat at my desk, I kept imagining myself standing in front of the room with every eye on me, and the thought made my stomach twist. Isn't that neat how it says basically that? But now we can feel something. And that's really the point. Because remember, we're always talking about what to know. All right, we see what to know. What to do, we're not there yet. You haven't given an application and you may or may not. But what to feel is really what makes it artistic and what makes it worth reading most of the time is that we can connect emotionally with the reader. And then coherence. I kept checking the clock. I knew my father's surgery would take hours. The waiting room was cold. My mind kept jumping to worst case scenarios. Frankly, I don't hate that. From a minimalist standpoint, I don't feel like I'm lost reading that. I tend to like short, but it is a little jumbled. The waiting room was cold enough that I rubbed my hands together just to keep them warm. I kept checking the clock, even though I knew my father's surgery would take hours. Each time I looked away, my mind jumped to worst case scenarios, and I had to force myself to breathe slowly. So you have setting, then action, then reason, then inner response. You got emotion. But honestly, I can get emotion out of this too. So sometimes it's a style thing.